It goes without saying that Keir Starmer's Labour gets an easier ride in the media than Corbyn ever did. That's in large part because Starmer, unlike Corbyn, shares the values and interests of the wealthy media class concentrated in central London. But the alliance between centrist Labour and the sensible broadcast press has, of late, started to get even cruder. First up, this was an interview on Good Morning Britain this Wednesday.
What do you think it is around the people who supported Jeremy Corbyn, Margaret, which still means, even today, they can't accept that there was a problem of anti-Semitism in Labour during those years? And is there any prospect that Sir Keir Starmer could bring Jeremy Corbyn back into to full membership of the Labour Party?
I can't think of any circumstances at all in which Jeremy Corbyn could stand as a Labour candidate at the next election.
So that was the anti-Corbyn and pro-Starmer MP Margaret Hodge being interviewed by the anti-Corbyn and pro-Starmer Ed Balls. Balls is, of course, also husband to the current Shadow Home Secretary. How delightfully cosy. Now fast forward to Thursday, and we have an interview with Mike Katz. He's chair of the anti-Corbyn and pro-Starmer Jewish Labour movement. And take a look at who interviewed him on LBC.
How much credit should go to Keir Starmer, who said that he would grip this right from the moment he took over? And what do you think about his decision yesterday to say, look, Jeremy Corbyn will not be returning to the Labour fold?
Well, firstly, I think it's a lot of the mechanical things that we as the JLM were involved in helping the party implement. That was rightly down to the David Evans Labour Party General Secretary, the National Executive Committee, the mechanics of the party. But it never would have happened without Keir's leadership, as I say, from the get-go. And I want to be very, very clear about that.
What a tough interview. Literally, Keir Starmer's Foreign Secretary, or Shadow Foreign Secretary, asking a pro-Keir Starmer guest, just how great is Keir Starmer? How terrible was Jeremy Corbyn? How great is Keir Starmer? And then the guest says, oh, yes, Jeremy Corbyn was terrible. Keir Starmer is great. Very, very engaging radio, of course, not biased at all. The story also goes full circle because on Friday morning, David Lammy had switched from host to guest, being interviewed by, you guessed it, former stalwart of Labour centrism and husband of the Shadow Home Secretary, Ed Balls.
Jeremy Corbyn, you've, I know, apologised for nominating him in 2015. He's now not going to be a Labour candidate at the next general election. But don't you have some sympathy for all those Labour Party members in Islington who say he's been our MP for 40 years, Keir Starmer's now going to stop us choosing him again to be our MP? They say this is undemocratic. Don't you have a bit of sympathy for them?
You know, I spoke to Mike Katz, the chair of the Jewish Labour movement, yesterday, and reflecting on the last few years and how difficult it's been to be a Jewish member of the Labour Party and the huge progress that's now been made by Keir Starmer. Credit to him right from the beginning, saying that we were going to grip and deal with this.
Of course, David Lammy isn't the only new Labour character who gets to play both host and guest, because on Sunday, Ed Balls started the week by being interviewed about exactly the same story.
Who would ever have thought, though, that in the past couple of years, that anti-Semitism would become a real issue in the Labour Party?
Well, of course, there was always strains of anti-Semitism in the left going back 100 years or more, for the reasons David said about sort of, the capitalist forces controlling the global economy.
It's famously called the socialism of fools. I'm never entirely sure who created that, George Bernard Shaw or whatever, but the anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools because of the association of Jews with money and capitalism.
But the mainstream Labour Party in modern times didn't have anti-Semitic problems.
The mainstream Labour Party and its membership changed very substantially over those years since 2015. The Labour Party is still in special measures, waiting for the ECHR to finally conclude that Labour's done enough to put that stain to one side. That's not happened yet. Keir Starmer, I think, has been working really hard to do that. And Jeremy Corbyn, who couldn't recognise the findings of that report, is no longer a member of the Labour Party. And I think Keir Starmer will keep it that way because it's important that he shows Labour is changing. But it was a dark, terrible period in Labour's history.
So that guy who was trashing Jeremy Corbyn on the Sunday then spent the whole week interviewing Labour politicians about Jeremy Corbyn. Aaron, I've got a question for you. Is there a single job which is easier in Britain right now than going on the broadcast media and saying how great Keir Starmer is and how terrible Jeremy Corbyn was and continues to be?
No. It's a very easy job, Michael, because some of the least talented people in the country in politics and media do it seemingly every day. You could add more names to this. You know, either Ed Balls is presenting Good Morning Britain, Michael, or Alastair Campbell is, right? Jackie Smith, the former Labour Home Secretary, she often appears on LBC too, or as a pundit. This is absolutely extraordinary. We're looking at the lowest ebb, the rock bottom of the British media in real time. And I have to say, Michael, this is something I've been thinking about for a while. You have the media, you've got broadcast, and then you've got obviously print. Both are online, but that's the historic binary. Broadcast comprises radio, TV, print is obviously the newspapers, principally the daily print newspapers. Now, in this country, I believe that the print papers, the print media, are clearly to the right. They're clearly conservative. I think that's indisputable, particularly the tabloids, but you had the Telegraph and the Times too. And then I think you've got broadcast media, which is actually effectively New Labour. They're all in London. They're all members of the permanent media political class. They all know one another. Many of them went to university with one another. And it's a club. And that's really New Labour. And what's really interesting, Michael, is that compromise, which is quite homeostatic, which is to say that it's quite balanced. One balances the other out under normal conditions. That whole sort of settlement collapsed with Corbynism because, of course, you had somebody who wasn't from either camp. So when you have a New Labour government or a New Labour politician doing well, they're attacked by the right-wing press. And when you have the Conservatives, they're often undermined by broadcast, far more than the print, right? So it's a useful settlement in a two-party system. Of course, that's not very good because sometimes the two parties aren't presenting the right ideas. Sometimes they both agree on something like austerity, in which case you get buy-in on austerity from both parties and all the media. Okay, and actually austerity was the wrong idea. And on a bunch of policy issues, particularly public services, taxing the rich, reinvigorating high streets, Jeremy Corbyn had the right idea. But because he wasn't New Labour or Tory, he got attacks from both sides. So I think inherently we're already seeing this clown show. I mean, Michael, that set of clips was remarkable. It's jaw-dropping. I would defy any other country in Western Europe, most certainly, to produce a series of clips like that. It is absolutely extraordinary. It's a circus, or is it a merry-go-round, or is it even worse, both? I would submit it is absolutely remarkable. And I wonder how much further it will go. And finally, to conclude, these people seem to have no capacity for self-reflection. David Lammy is saying, I was talking to Mike Katz yesterday. Yeah, you were talking to him as an LBC host. You weren't having a private meeting at Westminster in one of your offices. Talking, I'm really hearing your concerns and your considerations. You were doing it as a media pundit. Breakdown, Michael. Absolute breakdown. And look, people, again, I've talked about people not trusting politicians. People don't trust journalists. And again, if you're in London, if you're in the club, if you're one of the big house London pundits with your nice big house in Zone 2, right, and you have your lovely local gastro pub where you can go for lunch, have a shot of Calvados, have a late lunch, and then file something for The Guardian or The Times, well, of course, the stupid plebs in the rest of the country, they're completely wrong. The media does a fine job. Finest in the world. No, actually, turns out the people who criticise the journalists and the media are just the same as the ones who criticise the politicians. Their analysis is broadly correct. You're terrible. You're insular, incurious, mediocre, and nepotistic.
Especially that last clip where you just got Ed Balls, George Osborne, David Baddiel, and Andrew Neil talking about how terrible Jeremy Corbyn is. I mean, it might as well be a fly-on-the-wall documentary in a West London dinner party. It was so cozy. The consensus was so solid and unspoken, and it was so lazy, all of the analysis. Times Radio, I mean, it's supposed to be a bit more objective, but this was Channel 4, right? It's not a YouTube show, it's Channel 4. It's one of the big broadcast channels, supposed to be regulated by Ofcom, and you just got all of these people who fundamentally agree, from a very fundamentally similar class, chatting about something which is actually very contentious, which a huge swathe of the population really fundamentally disagrees with them. And I mean, we were talking about this earlier, Aaron. What would have been the equivalent in the Corbyn years? I suppose David Lammy interviewing Mike Katz might be, if they gave Diane Abbott an LBC show and she was interviewing John Landsman, and that was considered sort of like normal, objective journalism. We can't even say what would have happened if that, because it wouldn't have happened, right?
Can you imagine? I mean, there would be the pylon from The Guardian and, all the liberals and all, there would be pylon. There'd be hundreds of complaints to Ofcom. LBC is the new Russia Today. Diane Abbott hosts a show there. It would be like Diane Abbott asking me questions about media reform. We've got Aaron Bastani here from Novara Media. He's here to talk about why we need X number of media reforms and why we should start funding organizations in digital media whose name starts with an N. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that, Aaron? Diane, I think it's a fantastic idea. I hope a Corbyn government instigates it immediately. Very much needed. Thanks for your time, Aaron. Really interesting insights. That's basically what they're doing. Mike Catt's being interviewed by bloody David Lammy.
And then the following day, Diane Abbott's on Good Morning Britain being interviewed by John Rees from Stop the War Coalition about media reform. She says, actually, I was talking to Aaron Bastani yesterday, and he was saying that we should do media reform and fund all these organisations that begin with the letter N. And John Rees is there going like, oh, that's very interesting, actually. That's literally the analogy. And you think, how crazy would that be? This is that, right?
That's basically what this is. That's the British media. It's so cozy, Michael. It's so cozy. And they think if you point this out and you say, perhaps this is slightly unprofessional, they think you're an idiot. They don't just think you're wrong. They think you're an idiot. They think, low education, low status opinion. No. High status opinion is they're all so smart in London inside the M25 with their big house in Islington, all have the same opinion. And if you disagree, you must be stupid. So that's where we are.